welcome back. This time we have Chris Locke, who's put his name in as a candidate for Stanley. Chris, welcome to the FITV interviews.
Hello Richard, and thank you very much for allowing me to come here and say my piece.
It's a pleasure. Chris, what skills do you think you can bring to the Assembly, and if elected, what portfolios would you like to hold?
Well, I mean, Richard, as you know, I was in government for 5 years as the Harbour Master and Marine Officer, so I spent a lot of time in the government environment.
Yeah.
I understand how it works. And I think one of my key successes was bringing on the new maritime legislation through the introduction of Harbour Maritimes Bill. So I understand how difficult it can be and how frustrating it can be. And with that knowledge, I'm sure that's quite a skill set in itself.
Yes.
But also, I mean, you do know me, I'm a personal guy. I like talking to people, and I'll use that to understand people's problems and issues, and hopefully, I can't make a promises, but hopefully you can understand what their concerns are and therefore use those to help them and help to take them the way I conduct my business. Having said that, I won't always accept the first answer given, and Nancy will tell you that I'm quite stubborn but also quite determined to succeed. So I think those are the key elements. Determination to succeed, I think, goes through the core of me, and I won't just back down for the sake of it. I think those are fundamental reasons for standing and what an asset to the role. And you asked me about what portfolio I would like to be in. I know maritime's been my life, but maybe it's time to break away from maritime. I've always had an interest in health, so I would, if given the opportunity, and I know it's never straightforward, but I would like to be a portfolio for health if that's the way it works. But also, second portfolio perhaps, if I'm allowed to, the emergency services and island security, because that does have a bit of maritime in it.
What are the main issues do you think are going to need to be addressed by the new Assembly?
I think there are a lot. There's clearly a lot.
Absolutely.
I think one of the key ones immediately now is how we deal with post-COVID. There are businesses out there, particularly the tourist industry, which, although they've had the trip scheme, some people have not been benefited as well as perhaps others from that, particularly shop owners. So we need to find a way of bringing back the tourists so that the livelihood of the shop owners and the tourist industry can go forward. Now, I've got no answers sat here now, but talking to the experts in the field, we need to take that forward. I'm very conscious of that. We'll probably talk about it later, but clearly there's a massive infrastructure build program going on, and money is not readily available, but there are some projects which really do need to be delivered, and the port for me is a key issue. But also we've got the vulnerable persons unit, we've got the new power station in whatever form that may be, and I have my views on that too. So there's a lot, and the schools need looking at whether we need to build complete new schools or whether we develop the footprint again. So that's a major issue, and where we get the money from. And again, for me, and we'll talk about it later, but there's only two issues. We either borrow it or we use our resources, and those need to be fully ironed out on each project. But I mean, if I can say that with any project, I think it's wrong to salami-slice a project. And let's take the port, for example. We've got a port, it's been designed, and I'm already hearing that things are being cut back, salami-sliced. If you're not careful, if you cut back too much, you'll have a port which isn't fit for purpose, and you need to be very careful on that.
Yes. When first elected members are fairly well briefed by the general public about what their opinions on all the subjects are. Yeah. How would you want to keep in touch with the public if elected? One of the things that's been used is Facebook, but I'm afraid to say that it appears it's being used as a soapbox rather than really an indication of what people are thinking.
No, Richard, thank you. I will have to admit that I've never really been a Facebook man, but yesterday was the first time I opened my Facebook account, and it's interesting. I do agree with you. A lot of what I've seen on Nancy's Facebook, a lot of uncomfortable words, and people are being quite vindictive on it, and that goes in my manifesto statement that I'm not a Facebook fan per se, although I do understand it has its advantages and it gets the message out quickly. But I think there are other ways, and as you say, so the question was, post-election, how do we get our message out? What we've been doing, what the MLAs are doing already is they're holding public meetings, having their surgeries. And I think that with the surgeries, it's really important not to have it perhaps during working days, but when people can come and see you after work or at times to suit themselves and make yourself ready, available. I'm not going to hide away, be a personable and just be out there, really. I think that's key. I would never turn anybody, if anybody wants to knock on the door, I'm more than welcome, give you a cup of tea, we can sit down and talk about the issues that are important. So I do understand the problems that we're all now out there trying to make our cases known, but what happens when we go into government?
There's a large number, or it's quite a number of large infrastructure projects which are either being planned or even started. How do you think we should deal with these? I'm thinking really of the port and the power station, Tussock House, those sort of things.
I mean, we have touched on the port, and I think I've made myself quite clear on that, so probably don't need to go too more on it, except that for me, from a maritime background, I understand the significance of a port. If we don't have a port, then how are you going to get everything else in? We've seen it when there was an accident on the port a couple of years ago. You can only bring one ship in, and there are real issues, and when the Scout doesn't turn up, we all understand when the shelves are clear, how else do you get our goods and produce in, and more importantly, how do we get our exports out? So that is key. And with the port, we need to make sure there's a refrigeration space available. But anyway, talked about the port. It's a passion of mine. For me, it has to happen, and I will push for that. But as I said, the vulnerable persons unit, I'm concerned that we have this lovely sort of big car park down by the sea, and nothing's really happened. So I'd like to know how we're going to push that forwards. The power station. So I have my own thoughts on that. Do we invest in a power plant exactly the same that we've got now, powered off diesel generators, or do we think more sort of carefully, do we not need to think about going more green, sustainability? So I understand that our power plant at the moment is pretty much broken. We've got to do something quick. But is having completely one for one, is that the right answer? And I don't know, but I do know we do need to do something with our power plant process.
One of the most common issues being discussed on the streets at the moment is salmon farming. What is your approach to the?
Well, Richard, thank you for giving me the opportunity to bring that up. I mean, I have the brochure here. Our inshore waters are pristine from the Falklands free salmon. I am opposed in total to any consideration to having farm pens in the islands in our pristine waters. For me, it just doesn't work. I've read the evidence. I don't need to go through any more. For me, it's as clear as day that it would be wrong. That said, I do understand that there are revenue generation issues. I mean, you get a lot of money from it. I understand that. But are we really prepared to sacrifice our pristine waters for fiscal return? And for me, I don't think it's worth it.
Yes. Communication speeds are quite a discussion, both in Stanley and Camp.
Yes.
How do we deal with this?
It's been a problem ever since we've been able to talk to the world in many ways.
Yes.
So Starlink could be an answer. I'm not saying it is, but it could be, particularly for those out in camp. I mean, it's a viable proposition. On the other hand, if we go down the Starlink thought process, then how about do we deal with internal communications? Starlink is fine for dealing with external through satellites, but we still need to be able to pick up the phone and say, "Hi, Richard, how do I talk to you?" And Starlink doesn't provide, I may stand corrected, but it doesn't it can't provide mobile phone access to you and me if I was in the street.
No.
Sure, in a difficult position, in the geographical position of the Falklands doesn't make it easy. I understand that, but I think there's a lot more that can be done, and we need to work with the regulator in bringing that forward to increase speeds so that we all can talk to the world.
Yes, thank you. Possibly this is a good time when you're talking about our isolation. COVID has caused lots of problems all around the world in the last 18 months or so, and the Falklands have been fortunate in avoiding the major problems. However, it's raised the issue of how reliant we are in imported goods and the problems which you touched on about if the port doesn't work and such like. But if for some reason our supplies or certain supplies got cut, we would have problems. How do we deal with this?
I mean, that's a strategic question which I can't give you an immediate answer to, because it's a bigger problem than just COVID. But clearly we perhaps need to identify the key products that we will need to sustain our livelihood here. And it's expensive, but do we need to have a 3 months worth supply of milk and essentials, flour? I don't know, it's a hard decision to make, because clearly the projects can't sit on the shelf forever, but it's something perhaps we need to look into. Do we need to look more into sustainability, looking to Chile and access in that route if the air bridges, etc., isn't available? It's a difficult question. I can't give you all the answers, but it's certainly highlighted that there is a problem there,
yes.
And we need to address it.
Housing. Can we just touch on housing briefly?
Yeah.
It's becoming quite a problem for the lower paid to get on the housing ladder.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
There are a number of ways, but clearly housing is vital to the youngsters to get on to, well, first-time buyers, anybody to get on.
First-time buyers,
I'm speaking from my own experience. For first-time buying here in the islands was a very difficult and time-consuming process, and I am less in favour of this arbitrary bidding. I mean, I understand it's historical, but really a first-time buyer needs to know exactly how much it's going to cost for him or them to buy a plot, and so therefore then they can then go and get their mortgage.
Yeah.
So subsidies for the government should be considered, and whether rent rebates or mortgage rebates are required. So buy a house and the government will give you a loan, and you then pay that loan back. It's an option. It's what happens in the UK. But I'm concerned, as you said, house prices for first-time buyers are going up and up and up, and it's to do, I think, with the bidding process. Everybody's pushing it up, and I think that needs to be reviewed on how that happens.
Yes, okay. The members are expected to travel overseas quite a bit for various things. Would you be prepared to travel overseas, and do you support that concept?
No, absolutely. I mean, I've travelled all my life. Yes. I have no problems in going overseas. In fact, I think it's vital. The islands, we are, at the southern part of the world. If we're going to punch above our weight, we need to be out there. With COP26, which I know can't go to, but we should be there. Yeah. We should be going to all the Commonwealth. Parliamentary associations and JMCs. We should make a representation to be there, and I was certainly. In fact, it's one of the things that attracts me to the job. That I like, as I said earlier, I like going out and meeting people, talking to people, and perhaps, in fact, waving the Falklands flag in many ways. That this is
Chris,
where I live.
Thank you very much.
What I want to do.
I'm afraid your time's up.
Thank you.